Hello, and welcome to a Bible study from Lutheran Church in the Foothills in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, California. Lutheran Church in the Foothills Sunday morning worship is at 10 a.m., and all safety precautions are taken. We continue with our online worship at the same time, and watch for our online worship on our website at www.lcifoothills.org, or look for us in YouTube, Lutheran Church in the Foothills, La Cañada. Next Sunday at 10 a.m., we'll have an in-person and Zoom Bible study for adults in our conference room. And at the same time as our regular Sunday worship, we will have Sunday school for the children. And thanks for all who make this possible. I ask that you join with the people of Ukraine and Russia and all the world in praying for peace in Europe and everywhere in our world. My name is Pastor Chuck Bunnell, and it is my joy and privilege to share with you Paul's first letter to the Christians at Corinth, chapter 10, verses 1 through 13. Now, by all accounts, Corinth was a rowdy, holds barred, wide open city. It had none of the pretensions or appearances of propriety and order you might have found in a military city like Philippi. There was no sense that there were morals to uphold, morals that would be preached but then ignored, as in Rome. Corinth was just a wild place. And it could be said that it would be no surprise that Paul was frankly shocked by what went on in the church in Corinth. Paul really lays down the law, starting with verse 1. I don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were under all the cloud. Then Paul starts referring to the Old Testament stories of the children of Israel wandering in the desert. For example, Ezekiel 13:21. The Lord went in front of them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light. Paul continues in his letter, and all passed through the sea. And of course, Paul was referring to Exodus chapter 14. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Make sure you see the Ten Commandments. That's by Cecil B. DeMille, a great portrayal. Verse 2, Paul continues, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Paul is referring to baptism, which he'll go into further in the 12th chapter. Verse 4 of chapter 10, Paul continues, all ate the same spiritual food. And here Paul is referring to Holy Communion. He'll talk more about that in chapter 11. Ezekiel 16:4 tells us, Exodus 16:4 tells us, then the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. And Paul continues in his letter, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. We hear from the Old Testament, God tells Moses, go on ahead of the people. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink. Also, there was a story that this rock followed the people all through their journeys, but that's not really in the Old Testament. But Paul saw it as Christ. Verse 5 in his letter to the First Corinthians. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and they were struck down in the wilderness. And in Numbers 16, we hear, say to them, this is God, as I live, says the Lord, I will do to you the very things I heard you say. Your dead bodies shall fall in this very wilderness, and all of your number included in the census, from 20 years old and upward, who have complained against me, not one of you shall come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb and Joshua. But your little ones I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have despised. Paul continues with verse 6. Now these things occurred as examples for us, so that we might not desire evil. They did. Do not become idolaters, as some of them did, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. Of course, Paul is referring back to Exodus chapter 32, beginning with verse 2. And Aaron said to them, you see, Moses had been up on the mountain for a long time, and they thought maybe he had died. So Moses tried to make up for that and keep things going. And he said, Aaron said to them, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. All the people took off the golden rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. Verse 8 of Paul's letter continues. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did. 23,000 fell in a single day. That story comes from Exodus 25. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people ate and bowed down to their gods. Thus Israel yoked itself to the Baal of Peor. And God's anger was kindled against Israel, and God sent a plague on them. Those that died by the plague were 24,000. Verse 9, Paul continues, we must not put Christ to the test. Some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. Here Paul is referring to the story about how the people from Mount Hor, they set out by the way to the Red Sea. But the people became impatient on the way, and the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many Israelites died. Verse 10 of Paul's letter to the Corinthians. And do not complain as some of them did, and they were destroyed by the destroyer. Paul's referring to Numbers chapter 16, beginning at verse 13. The people were saying, is it too little that you've brought us up out of the land flowing of milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? They're talking about Egypt. We will not come. They wouldn't follow Moses anymore. On the next day, the whole congregation of the Israelites rebelled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. So God let loose a plague upon the children of Israel. And Moses said to Aaron, take your censer, put fire on it from the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Those who died by the plague were 14,700. Paul concludes, beginning in verse 11 of 1 Corinthians 10. These things happened to them to serve as an example, and they were written down to instruct us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. So, Paul tells us and those people in Corinth, if you think you're standing, watch out that you do not fall. Then comes with verse 13 some good news, and this originates with Paul. This is not from the Old Testament. It's something original with Paul. Paul tells us that no testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. That's good news. It has been said that everything we need to know as Christians is in Paul's first letter to these rowdy, wayward Christians at Corinth. Along with everything else, here he is warning that we need to remember that you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Thank you for listening. God's blessings, and please remember to pray for the Ukraine.